So I'm reading from Mintzberg on Management, chapter number 17, How Societies Become Unmanageable. And there's a number of points here. First of all, I always like it when people talk about other different parts of Canadian culture. Now in his book on management, chapter 17, he talks about the Inuit, hunters finding their way across dozens of miles of flat tundra to visit people. And he's talking about this story in the context of how sometimes people are challenged to describe things in terms that are not relevant. And what he says in this particular situation is, if you were to ask an Inuit hunter, where was your GPS coordinate, where was your map coordinate, etc., they couldn't answer that question. They just know intuitively, well, over there where the polar bears are, that's where I head in that direction. So the point I'm getting at is, sometimes when you're making decisions about things, it's not always possible to describe in very precise mathematical detail using financial ratio analysis, etc. You just have an intuition. And that's why he talks about the Inuit hunter's intuition. Because there's many examples in our world where sometimes a gut feeling, there's something wrong with the company. I don't know if it's the customers, I don't know if it's employees pissing off the customers. There's just something wrong, a gut feeling, right? Today is Sam Snyderman died. Sam the Record Man. One of the most famous Canadian businessmen who didn't have an MBA, but very successful in business because he just had a gut feeling about how to satisfy the customer. That's point number one. And what he was concerned about is that the circumstances of business and marketing as it's studied is dulling our senses and driving away the role of intuition. It doesn't seem to be that there's a role in society for people to just have a gut feeling. They always have to have it backed up with numbers. Okay, second point. As a result, society has become unmanageable as a result of management. He's talking about bureaucracy. Bureaucracy was invented by two very well-known cultures, the Chinese and the English, right? Who created this whole system of, manager, deputy manager, assistant manager, etc., to be able to run large groups of organizing people. We could see why that happened. But sometimes the excessive number of layers of management has made society and businesses unmanageable. All right, third point. The third point is, can a leader know enough to conceive a vision in an entrepreneurial way or even deal with all the initiatives coming up from below? TMI, too much information, right? This is why some people say Obama crashed when it came to the economic situation in the United States. He's good, not necessarily being a leader, but by good at motivating people to believe he could be a leader. Sometimes the skills that we have to motivate people and be in charge and be looked up to are completely different than being able to have a very anal, retentive understanding of minute detail. And sometimes understanding all that detail is way beyond one person. There's just too much information that's involved and too complex. A fourth point, talking about the life cycle of organizations. He talks about old, spent organizations incapable of finding new direction or inspiring their people or sustaining through political means at the expense and the creation of fresh new ones. So in your intro to management class, you learned about the product life cycle, introduction, growth, maturity, and decline. Well, he talks about the same point here in terms of organizations. That sometimes older organizations create a situation that makes it very difficult for younger organizations to get going in the introduction stage. Point number 5, talking about sports. And this is why I was interested in that as a background. The group dynamic in the U.S. is very important in the consequence of American history. Revolting against King George. It was reported in Chinese culture in terms of harvest time. The group dynamic in many cultures around the world is very significant. And one of the things they talk about in this, talking about page 338 here, the popularity of the most structured sports. American organizations, the greatest organizers of them all. So what I wanted to do is just to give a couple of comments about the importance of the group dynamic, which is very important in how people perceive their value. In Asian companies, sometimes one of the reasons why people continue to work way past closing time is not because they want to do anything intrinsic on their own, but they want to feel that they're important to the group and that the group needs them. Because if there isn't that connectivity, then they're independent on their own, Ronin, and that's disastrous. The other point he makes, talking about our society of organizations, is in good part a society of large organizations We swim in a sea of big business. And our society has gotten bigger and bigger as a result of this. Two reasons. Not just because the population increases, but because of where the population has moved to and where the population resides in urban areas. So this is one of the reasons why we have a society of large organizations. Because first of all, we have increasing urbanization of people having moved from the rural areas, and also the people in the urban areas themselves are increasing in population, which has also increased the intense competitive environment. 7th point, talking about competition and economists. Rational entrepreneurs who maximize profit, etc., reveals little about the behavior of big business, just as studying legislative bargaining among politicians doesn't really reveal much about big government. Yeah, the whole point there that sometimes theory just doesn't apply. The theoretical way of doing something doesn't really survive the real life circumstances. Point number 8, talking about machine bureaucracy. We tend to associate bureaucracy with red tape and other dysfunctions. Well, the reason for that is to handle the consequences of the complexity of too many people and too much information. So I would say the TMP and the TMI go hand in hand. Point number 9. He's talking about the most obvious explanation, the most functional, is that when operating tasks are simple and repetitive, as in the mass production of automobiles or the delivery of mail, the machine bureaucracy becomes the most natural way to organize. So this point here, he's talking about this concept of his machine bureaucracy. But actually it's a little bit out of date, because this is 2012. And most of our workers are knowledge workers. And we talk about now the information age, not the industrial age. Point number 10. Talking about some organizations are big, other organizations must become big in response. And big generally means impersonal. Only because it's too hard to respond to personal details, which is one of the challenges of big organizations. Okay, let's stop.